I'm a typical city boy myself, born and grew up in Seoul. City dwellers tend to think nothing much of the agricultural sector. Food and produce are just neatly packed product on the supermarket shelves, and as for the industry and people who produce them, meh, who cares? While we all need to eat, agriculture sector as a whole has been left out and uncared for in the most of developed world. The same goes sadly in Korea. Few young generation want work in the declining and physically demanding sector, and farms and fishing harbors are getting quieter, lifeless, and isolated. Today, we are visiting one such dairy farm tucked away in Gangwon province in Korea. Gangwon province is a particularly mountainous part of the land, beautiful nature but tough to live in, and somewhat forgotten in the process of industrial shift and economic growth. And it seems the whole area is riddled with paranormal activities. Or could it be the lonely, isolated life there driving people mad? Animal lovers among my viewers may find this story a horror for another reason, and indeed there are some description of animal abuse. But my focus is on the human condition on the lonely farm, and if you'd listen to it to the end and understand the context, you'd agree it's not a simple story of good and evil. So, here's a scary, weird, and somewhat sad account from a lonely dairy farm. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by your host, Anthony. That year, I was at the bottom of my life, consumed in the workplace politics and lost the job as the result. Girlfriend left me, and just in time, various issues flooded in, requiring more and more money. When I came across the post seeking for a live-in dairy farm hand in the middle of mountainous Gangwon province, it was a half desperation to do anything and half desire to escape far away from my troubles that made me apply for it. The farm was indeed in the middle of nowhere deep in the mountain. The first night there, I noticed there was not a single light anywhere around as far as my eyes could reach. On the farm was just one other 50-or-something-year-old man as a fellow live-in farm hand. Apart from him, the visit from the trucker, a man who was 3 years older than myself, who came every morning to bring supply and feed and take milk away, was the only human presence around. Fortunately, both guys were easygoing and agreeable characters. I was definitely ready to settle in the nature and wind down my worldly issues. But looking back, I must say there was some eerie air around the farm. There were flocks and flocks of crows, and the cows and dogs on the farm all had somewhat scared glint in their eyes. But one gets used to anything, and in a few weeks' time, I felt pretty much home there. But soon, a series of inexplicable incidents followed. On the route to the farm was a number of tunnels, and one of them came with rather spooky history that there was a car crash in the tunnel which led to fire that resulted in fatalities. The truck driver, let's call him Hyung-suk for the sake of the story, had to drive through that tunnel every morning, and he would complain it creeped him out every time. Granted, he was easily scared despite of his big burly stature. He'd say car radio would make funny noises, not quite like the usual static noise when the signal's lost. And then one day, the older farmhand, let's call him Mr. Kim for the sake of the story, Hyung-suk and I went out to a nearby town to have some barbecue and some fun in 노래방 and so on. By the time we were on our way back to the farm, it was already deep in the night, about 1 or 2 in the morning. I was startled out of my snooze from Hyung-suk's scream. I found the truck stopped in the middle of the tunnel. Even the engine was off for some reason. Hyung-suk wasn't himself, screaming with his head pushed down against the wheel, which triggered the car horn. But what really threw me off was the noise from the radio. Among the static noise was a loud, chaotic mixture of metallic grating, fire crackling, and kids' screams. I was overwhelmed by this hellish situation and just held on Hyung-chul's shoulder, who was still screaming. Then somebody knocked on the car window.
Are you alright? Is anything wrong?
That brought me back to the reality, and I rolled down the window. Apparently a car passing by found our truck dead stop in the middle of the tunnel, and the driver was worried if something was wrong with us. And just like that, the radio was playing the usual midnight music program. Hyung-suk was still panicking with uncontrollable sobs. He later told me what he saw before I woke up. As soon as the truck entered the tunnel, the radio lost the signal. And then, when we reached the midpoint of the tunnel, he saw an SUV car rushing out from the side wall of the tunnel. Before he could stop short, a blood-soaked child ran right towards the car, and it was his scream at the sight of the child that woke me up. In whatever case, Hyung-suk wasn't in the condition to drive, nor I. So I woke Mr. Kim, who'd been sleeping through the whole situation without a care. He scoffed at us.
God, you young boys, shaken by some silly rumors. It's common that radio signal gets weak in the tunnel and mixed up occasionally,
Mr. Kim said. I had no will to argue, but just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Mr. Kim claimed that he himself felt too tired to drive all the way back to the farm, and suggested we should just find somewhere to spend the night, that there was a holiday cottage nearby. And so we arrived Cheonggok Resort, and turned out our ordeal that night was just beginning. The resort seemed small and shabby, not quite living up to the name of a resort. Looking back, I did feel something was off, like the noise from the stream sounding so near, but I just assumed it natural that an off-season resort at midnight should feel a bit eerie. I and Mr. Kim got off the truck and looked for the manager. I found a little girl sitting alone under the tree in the courtyard. "What are you doing there so late at night?" I asked. She said she was waiting for her dad and her mom was home. I wondered if she was abandoned in this remote holiday resort by her parents. I asked where the manager of the resort was, but she just ran into a holiday cottage, and just then a middle-aged woman came out from the cottage next to it. She was the manager. So while Mr. Kim getting a room, I went back to the truck to fetch Hyung-suk. He woke up from his snooze, still looking half out of mind. He looked around and screamed.
Where have you taken me to? Have you gone mad?"
He shouted and honestly looked totally mad to me. He refused even to step out of the car, so in the end I just had to leave him there. The manager stopped me before I entered the holiday cottage we got. "Young man, take the other cottage over there. You'll find it more comfortable. I'm telling you because you remind me of my son," she said. Maybe there was so many empty rooms, it being an off-season. I anyway didn't feel like sharing the bed with Mr. Kim and was already too tired to think about anything, so I thanked her and took the cottage she directed me. The room seemed not cleaned up after the last guest, judging by some cosmetics and stuff left here and there, but it was a long day. During the night, I think I heard loud thunders and downpour outside, but I must have been so tired and slept on regardless of all the noises, until Hyung-suk woke me up the next morning. And the cottage was not what I remembered from the previous night. The floor was covered with dried mud, and all the furniture was strewn about. I ran outside. All around were yellow police lines and damaged cottage buildings, and there was not a sign of the heavy downpour I heard during the night either. Just a year ago, I later found out, the whole resort ground was swept away by the swollen stream during the summer monsoon season. They had illegally expanded their ground against the safety regulation and was denied any compensation or support for the damage for the reason, and the whole resort was abandoned in the state ever since. And I spent a night there. Seeing me confused, Hyung-suk said,
So, now you see things as they are? Imagine how terrified I was when I found you took me here. You were totally nuts last night ever since we left that damned tunnel. You drove all the way here, mumbling something to yourself. Don't you remember?
I didn't know what to say. But what about Mr. Kim? Where was he? Oh, right. He went back to the farm after dinner. Mr. Kim wasn't with us the whole night. Then what was everything I saw and experienced? As I looked around the ground, I realized one more thing. Where the cottages the little girl ran into, the manager came out from, and Mr. Kim was supposed to be sleeping in, there were nothing at all but a cliff. The whole chunk of ground there seemed to have been collapsed during the flooding. Probably this incident alone might have been enough for most sensitive people to quit, but I stayed on in the farm a while longer. By then I was already getting used to the work, and I guess I wanted to deny that I hallucinated a big time like that. One evening I was lying on bed and suddenly got curious about the calendar hung right above the bed head, for it was a bit unusual spot to hang a calendar. I flipped it through and found it was hiding some scribbles on the wall.
This place is cursed. Live now if you want to live.
And so on. I felt a bit of chill having experienced a terrifying night at the resort already, but on the other hand also laughed at the rather childish scribbles, so I contributed my own childish reaction by adding the word sax, because I didn't know better yet. One evening, the older farmhand, Mr. Kim, suggested that we have a drink. Didn't he say he disliked drinks? But I had no reason to oppose the idea and brought out bottles of beer and soju. Not long after, we were both getting a bit tipsy. Suddenly, the old farm dog jumped up and started barking at Mr. Kim. What was more surprising was Mr. Kim grabbing a sickle to wield towards the dog. The dog ran and hid itself underneath the floor, but it never stopped growling. Shouting and swearing all sorts of obscenities, it wasn't like the mild and quiet Mr. Kim I had thus far seen. His wild eyes, that turned almost cross-eyed with rage, creeped me out, and I just quickly bade him a good night and locked myself in my room. God, who would have known that normally mild men would turn nasty when drunk? Or so I thought then. In the morning I got up early as usual to feed and milk the cows. The old farm dog wagged its tail to say good morning, but Mr. Kim was nowhere to be seen. I was a bit worried, but decided to wait some time and got on with my morning routine. When Hyung-suk visited as any morning, he had something more to deliver than the usual supplies. Mr. Kim, still fast asleep in the truck, was a whole mess with scratches and mud stains, having clearly roamed and stumbled about the field. I asked Hyung-suk where he found him.
"Oh, the tomb down there,"
was his nonchalant reply. There was a relatively new tomb on the way up to the farm. Hyung-suk looked like he was not surprised at all, suggesting it wasn't the first time it happened. A few days later, the owner of the farm visited. The old man looked around the barn and soon struck an argument with Mr. Kim.
"Why are cows going missing?"
was the owner's complaint.
"But sir, have you forgot a cow died of old age? We buried it in the pit over there. And we lost a young from a bad diarrhea too. Counting all such loss, 288 is the right number,"
Mr. Kim insisted in return. After the owner left still angry, I remembered what the old man said when I applied for the job, that there were more than 300 cows on the farm and the work would be tough. Weren't there 300 also cows, Mr. Kim? Come to think of it, I think a few skinny ones in the third barn have gone missing, I said to Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim bluntly dismissed me, saying that I had no idea what I was saying and a newbie should stay out. I started sensing something was up with Mr. Kim. A few days later, Mr. Kim got drunk again, this time by himself. He wandered around the farm, shouting and wielding a sickle, while the old farm dog barking and growling at him from the under the floor. In the morning I found him missing again, and I went down to the tomb myself this time. Mr. Kim was indeed there, sprawling out by the tomb with a sickle still in his hand. When Hyung-suk came, I quietly asked him whose tomb that was and its relation to Mr. Kim. Hyung-suk said after a bit of a hesitation,
"Before you, there was another farmhand, Mr. Che, and last summer he was killed, stampeded by a group of cows. They were startled by the noise of a hunting rifle and ran down from the field where they were grazing. Mr. Che limped a bit and could not escape them in time."
Apparently his body was in a horrendous state after kicked and stampled by hundreds of cows. He had no family and was in the end buried at the edge of the farm. Having lost Che, who was more like a family than a colleague after 7 years on the farm, Kim venting out his grief was understandable, said Hyung-suk, and I agreed. Things were quiet about a couple of weeks. The season was quickly turning to autumn, and one afternoon, seeing me picking up some fallen chestnuts around, Mr. Kim told me there were some wild peach trees up on the hill. It should be the right time to pick them too. But when I approached the hillside, the first thing that welcomed me was not the sweet smell of ripening peaches, but that of rotting flesh. Probably because it was something so unexpected, I carried on exploring the area and found in the pit under the hill a dozen of dead cows. I dropped everything and ran back to the farm. I could not straight confront Mr. Kim, so first asked him where he buried the cows died of disease. He nonchalantly replied here and there on the farm ground.
"Didn't we bury two together when they died?" he said.
Did some sort of plague go around the cows then? I asked, but Mr. Kim denied any such too. It finally made me feel uncomfortable on the farm and suspicious of everything there. Life and death is a part of normal routine in any normal farm. But what was that scribble behind the calendar saying, "What have you done to deserve to come here to die?" Or what about the carcass of a buried cow found all dug out the following day? And the scene of crows attacking the weakling of a newborn calf and digging out its eyes? I finally made up my mind to quit the job. But right that evening, Mr. Kim got drunk and went mad again. This time, I discreetly followed him around from a distance. He kicked away the old farm dog that barked at him, then went to the third barn, opened a bag of feed, and poured it over the manger, shouting and swearing to the cows. Cows seemed all terrified and stayed well away from him, but Mr. Kim relentlessly threw stones at and poked them with a stick. No wonder cows in the third barn got so skinny. But that wasn't all. He tied up one of the cows with a rope and dragged the resisting animal down the hill with a truck. Then he smashed its head with a hammer and further slashed, kicked and stoned it till its screaming turned to silence. But what really creeped me out was what he kept shouting all the while.
"You killed me, bastard! You killed me, huh?"
He then dragged the cow back up the hill and threw it off into the pit where I found a dozen of dead cows earlier. By then I was so frozen cold with fear I could not even run away from the terrible scene. Mr. Kim then surprisingly calmly took a cow from another barn and into the third barn, took a shower, and went to the tomb where he would be usually found in the morning after the drunken rampage. I would have run away right that minute, but could not dare to drive down the unpaved mountain road, so packed all my stuff and waited till the first break of the dawn. As I drove around to avoid passing by the tomb where Mr. Kim should be, I was terrified if he would not pop out from somewhere and wield a sickle at me. The farm owner tried to persuade me to stay with a promise to raise my salary, but I turned it down, making an excuse that there was some family emergency. I still want to believe it was all rationally explainable, what I experienced on the farm. It was just a mixed signal in the tunnel, my drunkenness in the resort, and Mr. Kim had gone just a bit mad after losing his close friend. But whatever the case, I would never return to that damned place. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. This was another single story episode, and slightly shorter one at that, but I wasn't sure what other stories to pair it with, though I finished translating it quite some time ago. So, here you go. To be perfectly honest, I'll be away for about a week, so I wanted to make a relatively quick and straightforward episode ahead too. I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. I read stories mainly for an entertainment purpose, but some of them does shine a light to the side of the life and sections of the society that I usually don't give much thought to. This one was definitely one such story for me. Maybe I should do a series under the theme of haunted workplaces or something. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a like and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel to help it grow. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description. Buy Me a Coffee supporters will get an early access to my new videos. Thank you. I'll come back next Sunday. Stay safe and take care.